they felt like I was betraying my community. The words literally out of a guy's mouth, and he came up to me and said, "Why are you hanging out with that white boy?" Because when he said that to me, I challenged him back, and my words actually were, "He's more my brother than you're my brother."
What beliefs about people of other races did you pick up in your early years?
That white people couldn't be trusted, that the arc of power rested with them, and therefore we were always fighting to get a seat at the table. Yeah, mostly they couldn't be trusted, and they had all the power, therefore you were always beholden to them. How about you?
I think for me is that what I learned about people of other races was what I read or what I saw on television. So I think media and school informed my opinion because I had little personal experience or personal knowledge with people of different races, of any race really.
Yeah.
And so I knew that it existed, but it didn't impact my existence or anything like that. So I think everything I knew was about what I read. So I knew about Martin Luther King and, you know, I knew about Malcolm X and I knew about, you know, all of those things that you just kind of learn about.
Right.
But I didn't know anything deeper or personal or anything beyond that.
Yeah, none of mine was based off of what I read. It was all based off what I experienced.
How did the culture inside prison compare with the culture outside?
It was the same, only more concentrated for me. And I was forced to interact with people who were contrary to me as it relates to race because we were forced to live in the same proximity. Whereas here, there were biker gangs, there's Aryans in the neighborhood I grew up in, but they didn't live around me. They didn't want to be around me, and we didn't want to be around them. Whereas in prison, as it relates to race, I mean, it's a petri dish. It's that fruit bowl on the table, you know, we're all in there. And so it was, for me, it was comparable, but it was more concentrated. How about for you?
Me, it was a vastly different experience. I walked in and it was like I was in a foreign country. So there was new language, there was new social norms, there was, I mean, you know, when you meet somebody, you shake their hand, you look them in the eye and say, "Hi, I'm Jesse."
All right.
Like you do that in prison, you might get hit in the mouth. And so, you know, depending on who you're talking to, right? And so, you know, for me, what I observed is like, it's interesting because you say, you know, it was more together, but I'm looking at, man, this is more separated than anything I've ever seen.
Interesting.
So you got, you know, there's obviously groups, you know, if you want to be associated here, you talk to this group over there, you know. And so for me, I had to take a look around and say, okay, like I'm a lone wolf. Like I don't fit in any of these categories. And so how do I maneuver through all of this? Kind of understanding those dynamics, and then also understanding this kind of cultural, you know, shroud that kind of enveloped everything that is prison.
I had the complete opposite thought. I wanted to move toward power because I knew there was safety in the herd. And part of it, it's because the preconception I had, one about race, but also two about prison, which is kind of the underlying conversation, is that if I look at my life, I was almost groomed for a place they knew I would end up. So I knew all the prison norms. I knew what to do. I knew what to say. I knew who to avoid. I knew how white people saw black people in the context of prison. I knew that before I ever hit the yard. You know, so it's almost like I was prepared for it. And so I knew that whites were with whites, blacks were with blacks, Asians with Asians, you know, Hispanics, Latinos with Hispanic and Latinos. Like you stick to your own kind, you know, so it's very tribal in that way. And so I would have never thought about making a white friend in prison. Like that's a death sentence, you know, like you're crossing lines, you're crossing these well-established rules. These are rules of survival. Like you don't interact with people who aren't your kind, you know, like we talked about. So there was times where I was challenged borderline threatened.
Yeah.
Like, why are you hanging out with this white boy?
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget where you came from.
Right.
You know, and so there's some real choices, some costly choices we have to make to combat our preconceived notion. Okay, here you go. Is there a story of a specific time you realize the harshness of division in prison? Can you recall a time where you went, this is a war, it's not safe. It's really, race is a real thing in prison.
I think for me, so, you know, I remember going into the reception prison, you know, in Iowa where you go before they send you to the main prison where you're supposed to go. And so I remember I was in a cell, and I was in a cell by myself, and I was like so relieved because it's like, you know, I don't have someone in here with me. I didn't know what to do, or because I was all amped up, ready to, you know.
Right.
But then I can remember like when I finally did get a cellie, and then when I got, you know, this black guy, this young black kid. Man, you know, these guys do-rag on. He's banging on the table, trying to become the next, you know,
Tupac.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, hey man, I'm trying to sleep here, but like he ain't listening to me. Like I don't exist.
Right.
So then I realized, like, the more I push this, like, the more it's going to escalate, right?
Yeah.
So I think at that moment I realized, okay, like, I don't really have a voice here.
Yep.
And so I've got to learn different tactics and different ways to do things. But to be honest, you had to do that your whole life, man.
Yeah.
Like, so it was like this inverse
I get what
experience. But like, I mean, you had, you know, this from our stories, like how to talk a certain way, or you know, before we want to get communicated, or whatever those things were.
Yeah.
But I was having the same experience on the other side.
Yep.
And so it was just trying to figure out how to do that.
Right.
In order to, you know, be safe or survive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think for me it was really early on where it was, you know, I realized that okay, there's a strong line here.
There is.
And I just need to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, I would almost say that even within the ethos of prison culture, as it relates to race, I am bringing into this prison the oppressive nature of being black in America, and now I'm in the position of power.
Yeah.
And in that room, it wasn't just, I want to make beats and disregard my cellie sleeping. It's, white boy, you in my house now.
Yeah.
You know, and that becomes extremely clear. And that's why there's a separation. Well, like, I want to get around people, my people, where I'm respected, where I'm honored, where I'm safe. Because if I interact with someone from a different race, like that's on full display. There's no, you know, political correctness. There's no formalities. It's straight up. There is a divide between us. We know it. This is what I think about your race. This is what you think about mine. And if you interact with me, I'm not just interacting with you as another prisoner. I'm interacting with you on the basis of your race. What did other men in prison think about your friendship?
You know, I think this probably hits you harder than it does me, but I do know that people noticed it. And I do know that people will be like, man, why are you hanging out with Q all the time or whatever? But but I didn't really have anybody else that I was like talking to. I mean, I was kind of looked at. I mean, you can speak to this, but I think I was kind of looked at. I mean, nobody else really knew me.
So you didn't have even that relational history with people, you know, so you really were a lone wolf. Yeah, for me, for sure, I felt pressure from the black community. It felt like, at times the challenge was they felt like I was betraying my community, that I was overly investing in a relationship with someone who doesn't look like me, because their narrative is ultimately you can't trust him. You know, why are you investing all this time with someone who's going to betray you anyway? First chance he gets, he's going to choose his own over you. The words literally out of a guy's mouth. And he came up to me and said, "Why are you hanging out with that white boy?" And then his closing words, because when he said that to me, I challenged him back. And my words actually were, "He's more my brother than you're my brother." And then his closing words were, "Don't forget where you came from." So there was a pressure. But I think what helped alleviate some of it was it wasn't just you and I, but there was Lalo.
Right.
You know, there's this color palette of black, white, Hispanic, you know,
Right.
brothers who are all gathering together. And that's why they got a good picture of the kingdom. You know, all these people from all these different backgrounds are all doing life together.
Yeah, because I think even along that, like people, but it wasn't just about us all the time. You know,
Right.
it was. I mean, there was this like, you know, tapestry
It was beautiful.
that was built, you
Yep.
know, in the Academy Living Unit that
Yep.
everybody knew was different over there.
Yep,
I
that's
mean,
right.
that's why when they're hitting the yard, they're coming by like, hey,
right.
you know, what's happening over there?
Right?
You know,
That's right.
look at the, you know, what's up with the God Pod? But you
Yeah,
know,
that's right.
but at the same time, they would come and ask advice and,
Right.
and ask all these questions and,
Yeah.
and stuff like this. So they knew something was different. Did anything we learned in Prison Fellowship Academy affect the way you thought about race?
Everything. It changed my entire narrative. It made me more humble. It made me more gracious. It removed a lot of my preconceived notions. It's kind of hard to have an opinion about an entire race of people, right? Especially when you meet someone who doesn't fit the mold or who does affirm some of your thoughts. But you hear there's a story behind the story. It's not just the surface narrative that you've been taught to believe, because those people who told you that, they probably didn't know anyone of another ethnicity, or they had a bad experience. And so we've painted everyone, you know. So being in prison, you know, that boxing analogy, our ring was a lot smaller. You just couldn't move around the ring a lot. And so I had to see you every day. And I wanted to see you every day, you know. So it's completely changed my narrative about white people, other races in general.
Yeah, I think for me too, because I think you come in, and again, the academy just kind of throws everybody in. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the trajectory is like first year, it's like, well, yeah, you know, I met this person, and I normally wouldn't talk to this person, but that person's the exception.
Right.
Like, there's still this
That's
belief
good.
that I
That's
have
good.
about everybody else, but
Yeah.
you know, you're different,
Right.
and so like all of these assumptions I have still apply.
Right.
You know, so but then it even moves beyond that because you start to see more, bigger, and broader, and then you just think, man, this isn't them, it's me. Like I've got to change my perspective, and
That's
so
good.
and that takes time, and I think
That's
that's
hard.
You know, in the academy, it wasn't, you know, it's like we were going to class. I mean, we were living together,
Right.
It was
Eating
a
together.
year. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
and so when you're doing life or community together, all of those things get an opportunity to shift and change.
What do you think is key for people to think about if they want friendships with people from different backgrounds? So what's key for people to think about if they want to engage in this space we've been kind of talking about?
Yeah, you know, I think it's, man, there's a lot there, but I think it's number one, you have to be willing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, you were just talking about earlier, you know, hey, why don't you go into a black barbershop? You know, that's hard. Like even
It's
now,
costly.
like, I mean, do I want to go do that? I mean,
Right.
yeah, I mean, but you know, you don't know how you receive, and so it's risky, right? So you got to take risks,
Right.
and I think that you really have to put yourself out there and just say, hey, you know what, like,
Yeah.
I don't have the answers, and,
Yeah.
and you have to be okay with that. You have to be comfortable with that, and saying, you know what, I'm willing to listen. And I think if you look at even how the Lord walked the earth, I mean, what did
Yeah.
He do? I mean,
Right.
he didn't go around telling people this, that, and the other thing. I mean, people were still trying to figure out if He was the Messiah. He barely even told them that, you know. And so, like, you know, and so I think it's like He did a lot of listening. And when He did speak, you know, sometimes He was answering questions that they weren't quite asking.
Right. Right.
Because they didn't know what to ask even.
Right.
So I think that we've got to have enough, you know, relationship, number one with the Lord, but just in order to say, like, what am I supposed to learn? So am I a learner, or am I a, like, you know, on what side of the discussion am I on here?
You're right.
And so if both people sit at that, man, you can get a really long, but at least if one can come to the table with that, then I think that, you know, you're better off. And so, man, I think it's just building relationships, you know, understanding your role and responsibility just as a believer, but also just, you know, what is the end goal?
Yeah.
What is the Lord doing? What is He building?
Yeah.
And how are you a part of that? And so, in whatever role that you have, whatever brick that you put on,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, that's good enough. You're not going to solve all the problems. You're not. They've been in existence since forever. But the way you can solve it, you can change one person. I mean, you can reach.
Yep.
We can have one conversation.
Yep.
And so I think it just starts in incremental steps. And so we can look at systems, and we can dissect it, and we can look at policy, and we can look all these solutions, all these things that governments and a lot of it is really good, right? We want to have a society. We want to have it that's built on justice. All of these things. But what does the church do? Like, what do we do?
Yes.
How do we fit into that?
Right.
I think it's so important, and I think that's where we have to start. What is my role, and what is the Lord calling me to do?
Hopefully people viewing this have gotten this is what you do. You grab a chair, you grab a table and say, I got questions, I got assumptions. Can you be my person?
Mm-hmm.
Can I be your person? But I think you don't do that unless you first, I think you need vision first. You gotta see the value. To your point, everything that I value is already around me and I'm comfortable. So why go to a black barbershop when I can go to the one down the street where I know Fred, who, you know, he knows what he's doing. I'm comfortable there. And, you know, the whole, you know, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you, that all growth is on the other side of comfort, right? You can't grow and be comfortable. And everything about our lives, I'm building for comfort. I'm working long hours so I can get a nicer car, so I'm comfortable in it. Get a nicer house, so I'm comfortable in it. Get nicer clothes, so I'm comfortable in them. Buy comfort food, so I'm comfortable, you know. And so, but the narrative, not the narrative, but the imperative of the gospel is take up a cross. That's very uncomfortable, and die daily, which means there's some things that I gotta let die. I can't let live, whether it's ideologies, whether it's values, whether it's relationships. So you gotta, I would say, one, see the value. Two, you gotta be willing to count the cost. Three, you gotta be willing to come to the table and stay at the table. And then four, you gotta be gracious. If there's if there are fruit of the spirit or a Bible word you would use, I'll go gracious. You just gotta be super gracious with each other because you're gonna say it wrong, you're gonna do it wrong, you're gonna make mistakes. You know, it's gonna take longer than you think. It's just all those things. And if you can be gracious, like look at each other with truth, like, no, this is my brother. I believe that, like you said, I believe the best about him. And I think, you know, you just said it. I might not change the world. I can change my world.
Right.
Change your world.
Yeah.